Welcome to the Women Get Funded show, where we are dedicated to empowering women founders to shatter barriers and achieve exponential growth and funding for their business. Join us on this inspiring journey as we illuminate the path to unlocking opportunities and prosperity for women-led enterprises. With only 2% of venture funding going to women-led businesses and a mere 3% of women-led companies crossing the $1 million threshold, these startling statistics highlight the need for change. I am Kofo Selman, 5-time founder, impact investor, creator of the Force for Good business system, and your host on this transformative journey. In each episode, you'll meet a trailblazing woman leader. You will meet venture capitalists, CEOs, successful founders, and experts in scaling business growth. Our purpose is clear. We are here to open doors and provide women founders with invaluable access to advisors, investors, and visionary leaders who share our commitment to creating a better world through women-led business at Women Get Funded. We see a future where tomorrow's Amazons, Mercks, Microsofts, and Home Depots are born right here, led by women. They represent the future face of business, and we're here to make it happen. I believe that women-led business is the most powerful, transformative force of our time. Together, we make the world better through business. Are you in? Welcome to the Women Get Funded show. We are dedicated to empowering women founders to shatter barriers of growth and funding in their businesses. Thank you for joining us today as we illuminate the path to unlocking opportunities and prosperity for women-led enterprises. We have a very special guest today on the Women Get Funded show. We're thrilled to welcome Melissa Withers, a titan in the world of startup investment and business growth. As the managing partner and co-founder of RevUp Capital, Melissa has pioneered a dynamic approach to funding, overseeing the investment to over 50 growing B2B and B2C companies. Her strategy focuses on identifying promising enterprises and nurturing them through the complex market conditions, opting for a revenue return model instead of taking equity. We're going to talk a lot about this. So prior to RevUp, she honed her skills at BetaSpring and the Business Innovation Factory, where she excelled in crafting and leading multi-partner collaborations. Beyond her investment prowess, Melissa has also distinguished herself as a mentor with Techstars Boston, and her work at the Rhode Island Economic Development Corporation further underscores her ability to drive innovation and economic strategies that create impact. So join us today as Melissa shares insights from her extensive experience in capital deployment. We're going to talk about the capital toolkit that she encourages all women founders to develop, scaling for growth and building resilient businesses. Her engaging presence and deep understanding of this startup ecosystem makes her a compelling voice on our quest on the Women Get Funded show to empower women founders to grow and prosper. Welcome, Melissa. It is a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Rock star in the house.
Well, thank you.
Ditto.
Right back at you.
So tell us about, as you know, I always like to ask the question at the beginning, what's one book written by a woman that has significantly influenced your life?
Well, I'm going to just flip this a tiny bit on you. I think it's an amazing question. I studied literature as an undergraduate. I have a graduate degree in science and technical communications. So certainly books have been a huge part of my life from my first Encyclopedia Brown and Judy Blume book to the pulpy mystery novels that I read today, and certainly all of the books I had to read to graduate school. But when it comes to the question of influence, what has influenced me, I have to say that women in music and the texts of music have been far more influential on me than women in literature. And I think that's a product of coming into my own in the 1990s when you had artists like Ani DeFranco, Alanis Morissette, Liz Phair, who were really transforming the narrative around women's experience. And in particularly music that was expressing anger and talking about power, control, sex, really moving away from the sort of literary ideals of femininity in terms of either victimhood or hysteria. And so I was really raised on that first generation of women in music and women in rock who were really unabashedly flipping the script on female desire, female agency, female anger outside of the context of men's experience. And I think for me, particularly having studied literature, and I did my graduate work on Vladimir Nabokov, which is like not feminist literature at all.
Yeah.
But it made me, I think, a good communicator. So I think, I love books, and there are women who have written amazing books. But from an influence standpoint, the women of rock and roll have had far more influence over my life than the women authors that I've had the pleasure to read.
Amazing. I love that you shared these women, Ani DeFranco and Alanis Morissette. Totally. I grew up listening to that music and continue to today. And I like
All the time. I still go back
right,
to it. Yeah. Yeah. It's
right.
just really important. It was like the first time in American pop culture, there was female anger that wasn't hysteria, that was
Yeah.
like perfectly rationalized, but also anger and joy and agency and sex and things that were completely decoupled from masculine experience. And I think you see in me and in my how I carry myself, you see those artists all the time. They are with me every day. If I'm angry, it's Alanis. If I'm feeling kind of randy, it's Liz Phair. And if I'm just raging against the machine, it's Ani DeFranco. And it's Stevie Nicks when I want to just be free, right? Like in the absence of those female voices and those texts, I wouldn't be here today. So power to the ladies who sing their book.
Exactly. Power to the ladies who sing their books is absolutely right. I love it. Oh, so Melissa, I want to dive right in to the fund that you have built. On the RevUp website, it says you are founder focused, non-dilutive funding for early stage companies. You invest in B2B, B2C companies ascending from $1 million to 10 million. And it says, we know from experience and from the stellar performance of our portfolio that this curve can be conquered, which I love. Having the right resources and support along the way is critical. And this is why our non-dilutive model combines investment with hands-on support. Tell us more about what.
Just for a little bit of context, I didn't start here. So prior to this, my partners and I ran a very traditional equity fund. We did 90 companies through that fund before deciding to launch RevUp. And it was partially our experience in that model and in my experience with that model that ultimately led me to want to bring RevUp to the market back in 2016. And part of my frustration with the equity only system leading up to that moment was this myopic obsession with unicorns as the only way to create value. And it also just struck me as farcical that the only way an investor could make money was to exit a company, that there was no other way to monetize your investment. Those two things just felt at odds with what I understood about entrepreneurship in a broader spectrum. I was the first person in my family to graduate college. Without entrepreneurship, many people in my family and in my community, would never have gotten out of poverty. And so while we tend to think a lot about like just high tech entrepreneurship and robots and drugs, I think coming from a different experience with entrepreneurship, some of that stuff just didn't feel honest, right? And then as I was running this equity fund, I was just frustrated by I was saying yes to companies that had no product yet, no customers, but they had a hockey stick slide that promised that they'd be a $300 million company. And I was saying no to companies that, were in the market, had a product, had, good relationships with their customers, because they maybe weren't going to be big enough to attract downstream investors. And that for me I also felt that that obsession with exits and the limitations of that system was
Yeah.
contributing to a lot of the inequities that we saw. So when we moved in 2016 and brought RevUp to market, we just had a really simple idea that we could create an additional way, not a better way, an additional way to support early stage companies by tying our investment to growth rather than exits. So we could sort of invest in the journey rather than be completely constrained by the terminus of where the company was going to end up. But in many cases, you kind of know my bias here. It's really more about diversifying the capital toolkit that we have for supporting companies rather than advocating for one kind of capital over another. And in our model, very simply, rather than take equity ownership, companies return value to the fund as their revenue grows. And that just unlocked a lot of potential for us to invest in a much larger spectrum of companies and a really exciting asset class of founders that are the kinds of founders that I wanted to support anyway.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I'm going to come back and ask you to give us some more advice around capital stack and strategy. But first, I want to hear more about RevUp and what you look for in a founder, in a team, in a company, and what your thesis is around investment.
Yeah. So we are investing into companies that are in the market and selling. And if you've built a company, this will resonate. There's sort of like this 0 to 1 in broad strokes, 0 to $1 million in revenue. It might be 2 million if you have COGS. Again, don't let the orthodoxy get in the way of the understanding. And then there's this sort of 1 to 10 million. If you've built a company, 0 to 1 is pretty different than 1 to 10. And
Yeah.
actually, a lot of the things that get you to that first $1 million or 500,000, like whatever it is, not only will those things not get you to 10 million, some of those things will actually stop you from getting there. So founder led everything, right? Is amazing in the beginning. But if you can't get out of that and build your team and, begin to think about your business in ways that kind of get out of the founder's head, that's a barrier to growth, right? Having personality led, roles and positions in the beginning, very powerful. You need the right people, jack of all trades, people who can do all kinds of things. Again, as you mature, it's good to have those people around, but you also need positions and you need jobs and roles that are not entirely informed by personality. And so there's a lot of transition that happens at the bottom of that curve that's very painful. And if you've never gone through it, or if you've gone through it for the first time, it's very challenging, not only from a fundraising perspective, in terms of being in the middle of two worlds, but just from an operating standpoint, from a founder standpoint, a lot of the changes and decisions you have to make in that moment are not things that you may be well prepared to do on your own or may understand. And so we're gluttons for punishment. So we invest at the bottom of that curve and look for companies that track to that. So they're in the market selling, they have a product that works, people will buy it, but there's a long way to go, right? And it's time for them to start to think about what market-facing approaches are they going to layer on, how are they going to grow, and how are they going to begin to sort of make that journey from stage 1 into stage 2. And so we invest at the bottom of that curve.
That's wonderful. So how do you decide, right? How do you decide which are going to be the investments you want to make? I know there's some.
Yeah, it's hard. It's very personal
Yeah.
as well. I think there's a lot of chest thumping around thesis, but at early stage investing is a very intimate game, and we do have certain criteria. So my model doesn't work for all companies. So
Yeah.
and it doesn't work for lots of companies that I think are very important and exciting. So if you are a capital intensive company that's doing a lot of research and development, this is not the model for you. So if you're doing robots or drugs or therapeutics, very important things in the world that deserve to exist, this model isn't going to be right for you. But for lots of companies that are closer to the market, closer to revenue, these things might work. But again, like we can't invest into pre-revenue companies. I don't think it's responsible to ask a pre-revenue company to promise future revenue when you don't know what your revenue patterns look like. So we have some criteria around kind of economic starting point where our model makes sense. We're also looking for companies that are not stuck, so we don't remediate. So we're looking for companies that might be going slower than they want to because they're resource constrained, but they're not fundamentally stuck, right? They're not broken, right? I mean, again, there are other funders that remediate companies that are in trouble. I think that's great. It's just not what we do. And most importantly, we're looking for companies that we believe have a plausible path to get from that early revenue to that 10 to $20 million mark in a reasonably quick period of time over a couple of years. And I think, but most of all, because we are like a high touch fund, we're not like a bank. We're only making 10 to 12 investments a year, and we're with our companies for 4 to 6 years. We're only investing if we add strategic value beyond our cash contribution. So always conscientious to make sure that we're investing when we are smart money, when we're bringing something to the table, right? And we know that our value exceeds just the value of our cash contribution.
So when you make an investment, how much do you make what's the investment size typically? And then what happens? If you don't take equity and it's not contingent on an exit, how does it work that
Yeah. So our typical check size is anywhere between maybe $300,000, $500,000, depends on the company. And in our model, we use what's called a revenue contract. So a company agrees to share a small percentage of its revenue, maybe say 4%, could be revenue minus COGS. If you're, if you have COGS, that's not really revenue.
Right.
Over a long period of time, usually anywhere between 3 to 6 years until they reach a fixed multiple. And so the company will, at some point in time, usually somewhere between 3 months, 6 months after the investment, begin to return a revenue share to RevUp until they reach a fixed cap. And there are all other kinds of flavors of this. It's a pretty big asset class, but that's our model.
Yes. And so, okay, so I want to go there again, but so what do you look when you're looking, what are you hoping to, what's a good deal for you in terms of how you're what's your return on capital that you're looking for?
Yeah, we look for anywhere between a 2.2 and a 3x return on our investments over time.
Great. So you really need to see companies that are going to grow, right? You're going to fuel them with an injection of a couple $100,000 in cash.
And we're often investing like adjacent to other money, right? So whatever, we have to be confident that a company is going to be able to go from that first million in revenue, kind of get up that curve and get themselves to the 10 to $20 million positioning, over 3 to 5 years in order for us to achieve a successful outcome.
Great. And I always think it's super important for founders to understand what it is that specifically whatever fund it is they're pitching to, or if it's a bank or whatever it is, what are they looking for in terms of return? Because you either are going to fit that model or
yeah, absolutely. Ours is specified in our term sheet. So we use a fixed return model. So I and the founder know that this is the absolute max amount of money you're ever going to return, right? And this is the minimum amount of money that you're ever going to return. Yeah, it's in that sense, our model is quite transparent.
I love it. And I know too that it's important to you that you invest in businesses with founders who come from outside networks of privilege. I know that's something you talk about. Can you tell us a little more about that commitment, or how you look at it?
Yeah. It's not formalized or codified in our investment documents. I'm not required by any rules or regulations to do that, but it's a decision that sort of made itself over time, right?
Right.
70% of our investments have been into companies that have at least one female founder, and 30% have been into companies that have at least one Black or brown founder. And then overall, if you just look at the companies that we are most attracted to, many of those founders, man, woman, white, Black, they're founders that are strong operators. They know how to interact with the market. They're customer centric as much as they are investor centric. And again, not to say that you have to be disprivileged to be that kind of operator, but those kinds of founders learn by necessity that they need to have the market on their side, because they just don't come up believing that other people are going to fund their ambitions in perpetuity, right? So I think some of it's cultural. I mean, those are kind of my people. They're the kinds of businesses that I'm attracted to. I, as an angel investor, invest in all kinds of wacky stuff that doesn't look anything like that. Again, it's not to say that that's like innovation lottery stuff, right? But in terms of the amount of time that I spend building these companies, these are companies with real operating apparatus, and these are founders that kind of understand that, and they disproportionately tend to have learned to build their businesses without some of the perks of privilege. So some of it came about, I think, being a female-led fund at a time when, this is our seventh fund. We've been at this since 2016. I think there are a lot of founders that gravitate towards RevUp because of who we are. We have a profound influence on your business as investors, whether you want us to or not. Once we're in it, we're in it. And so I think it's helpful. And again, just because I'm a female does not mean I understand all female experience. But there are certainly ways that I contribute in the C-suite that I think are very important and very useful. And I do think it does help for a lot of our founders to have that sense of sense that they can relate. But I have a partner who's been very much a dude, old school, middle-aged white dude. And many of our female and Black and brown founders relate to him too. So I think some of it is just, he too built his first companies kind of bootstrapped, and then he raised a bunch of money. But I think a lot of it reflects our personal cultural tastes and interests. And then, of course, it is important, I think, that organizations make a commitment to fund these founders. And I'm certainly proud to do that. But I think I would be lying to you if I said I started out with this mission to support those kinds of founders, as much as those are just the founders I want to work with. I'll look like I'm careful not to cue national anthem, Melissa saves all the female founders, right? Now, it's also a great way to make money. These are really good founders who know how to build successful businesses. And my funds have really excellent performance results. And that's how I make money. And that's how I make money for my investors. So putting aside the good steals and the justness of it all, these are really good companies that are a good bet from an investment standpoint, and that you are smart to put your money behind these founders. So putting aside whether there's social justice as part of that, these are really good founders and good companies.
That's awesome. Yeah. And there's more and more, I'm speaking to the choir here, but there's certainly more and more evidence that shows that businesses that are founded by people that are underrepresented have higher return on capital, have higher performance.
Especially just diverse teams, right? You really want to see that. Yeah, you really want to see that in the C-suite. And there is really good data that bears out that diverse teams build stronger, more resilient organizations. It makes sense, right? They're going to attract different things. They're going to attract different talent. The collective is going to be better. It's going to be worth more, right? Because of it. And I will tell I've been now responsible for, we've made 60 investments through RevUp. We made 90 investments through the equity fund over the last 140 investments. I will tell you, with a few outliers, the best performing companies are those with diverse teams.
Okay. On that note, tell us about a couple of your favorite investments and what made them.
Yeah, this question is always hard because
I know you love them all, right?
No, it's not that. I don't love them all, actually. I try to be fair to all of them, but no, I don't love them all. Although I like a lot of them, which is really great. No, I think part of the model, what I love about what I do is we can define success in a few different ways. And so when I think about balancing what's successful for investors and what's successful for founders, the model that we have today has allowed us to bring those two things pretty close together, which is harder to do sometimes in the equity model, where what's good for investors is often bad for founders. And if it's really good for founders, a lot of times it's not good for the investors. It's just, they don't move sometimes, right? Most people, when they think about liquidation events, that happens a lot, where if it's good for one, it's not good for the other. It's very special when those two things overlap. There are a couple examples, like some of them are just, can I swear in your podcast, or will you?
Yeah, sure.
So one of them is just kind of like a fuck you kind of event, where we invested in a company that had a black, two dudes, black guy and a white guy. And they just weren't really taken seriously in their hometown of Raleigh, North Carolina. They were not welcomed with open arms by the venture community. And we invested in them very early on when none of the venture dudes would. And they went on to build an extremely successful company that they sold about a year and a half, 2 years ago for over $300 million. And when they sold that company, they made like 20 people became millionaires in a single day because they owned so much of their company. They have since taken many of their profits and redirected it into all kinds of investment opportunities that are now focused on the Raleigh-Durham area. And it is definitely a very satisfying because it was an incredible outcome for the founders and good outcome for us, of course. And those founders have gone on to become investors in my fund and have been really powerful advocates for underrepresented founders in my fund. So that one was just kind of like an FU win
I
that
love
on the kind of traditional big exit side. In smaller moments, a company that was always meant a lot to me, based in the Virginia area, two first-time founders, first men in their family to go to school, like go to higher ed. They were able to sell their company in a way that, in a much smaller way than the one I just told you about, but in a way that allowed one of these founders to like buy his mom a house.
Oh,
And it was like a real game changer for that family, right?
yeah.
That's not like, and I don't mean a mansion. I mean like a really modest little home, for
Yeah.
his mom. And that stuff's not success. Like that's not a success story in venture land, like, but it is in my world. And then some of the, more innovative stuff that we've gotten to funds. We're an investor in a company called Mosey Baby, which makes the first FDA approved kit for at-home artificial insemination, which has been hugely impactful for people who don't want to go to the clinic to turkey based themselves.
Yep.
They can do that at home. When you and I first met, we shared the stage with a young woman named Jessie Garcia, who's the founder of a company called Kazuda, which makes a tiny sticker, which is a non-electrical indicator that will tell you if a person wearing a helmet has received an impact significant enough to either hurt them or hurt the helmet. These are things that are a little bit outside of traditional venture. And those are just companies that have just been a pleasure to work with. And again, we have 60 companies in our portfolio. There's just so many that I can't mention, but um, companies that make things that the world wants and needs, and they have a way to bring that to market that's impactful, like immediately. That's very satisfying. It's just to kind of see their innovation at work in real time.
I just love hearing your stories and the way you're measuring success around these founders, because I think it speaks to who we are as founders. I consider myself a founder. I am also an investor, but I'm more of a founder than I am an
Yeah,
investor,
yeah, me too, me too.
right? And so, I know that you have, and I want to kind of take the conversation to this conversation about having a capital strategy as a
Yeah,
what does
yeah,
that
it's
mean?
really it's
What does
so I
that mean?
participate. Yeah, so I participate in a lot of early stage programs because it's fun and entrepreneurs are awesome. And if you're having a shitty day, talk to an entrepreneur and you'll realize that your life is good and they are really in the shit, but also very inspiring. I will say many of these programs are just kind of drunk on, 20-year-old Kool-Aid, where all of the conversation about business building is oriented around this concept of fundraising, right? Even the
Yes.
word fundraising, I studied language and semantics and semiotics, and I think words really matter. Sometimes what I'll say to like these groups, particularly in these like rural accelerators where, this really matters to these people. These aren't like wealthy college kids trying to take an at bat. These are people that are really trying to like make a life for themselves and their families. Is I'll say, rather than say, how will I fundraise for my startup? Say, how will I capitalize my business? Right? It's just already breaking free from the all of the baggage of fundraising, which usually means like some kind of equity investment, right? And marching down this linear path, like from angels to pre-seed to seed to Series A. And that's like a very false narrative that you just sort of march down this linear path of funding. So what I'll say is zoom out and say, how am I going to capitalize my business? And how am I going to do that over time? And I
Yes.
feel like even that subtle shift starts you because now you're thinking about capital, not fundraising. Oh,
Yes.
okay. So now like you've already increased the chances that you'll be thinking of something other than just, going from your angel round to a pre-seed round. And maybe you'll be thinking about, customer funded R&D. I mean, revenue as a kind of capital, right?
What
maybe at
is
least
that?
thinking about
Explain that. What is customer funded R&D? I was just talking
so many,
about
yeah,
that.
like, so,
Yeah.
yeah. So like, it's basically getting a customer to help you pay for improvements to your product wherein they get a little special slice of it. Maybe they get to use it exclusively for a little bit, or maybe they get it at a lesser price, right? But it's essentially thinking about using, like, not exactly the same as revenue. It's a little bit more sophisticated than that, where you're both sides kind of recognize that they've got a little skin in the game, but using your first customers sometimes as ways to extend your mileage, right? And doing custom projects for them. Like, there's a lot of, I think, side talk about not doing custom things for customers. Well, you can do custom things for for customers if you can extrapolate downstream value from that. So, thinking about other kinds of non-dilutive funding, whether it's an SBIR grant or an SBA
Yes.
loan,
Yes.
or again, I know these words get overused, but I have seen many companies be successful at using crowdfunding campaigns. Like,
Yes.
again, it's not this idea of anything's better than the other. It's just recognizing that the odds that you're going to walk down this linear path of equity funding is not only, I think, probably not going to happen. It's also just a very expensive way to think about building your business, and a great way to get yourself in trouble, wherein you sort of end up in an ownership position within your company, or within a fundraising position within your company that just might not be the right thing for you. So just try to think about, like, we talk a lot about finding, when you go to these programs, about mentors, and a lot of mentors are just, they're angel investors, which is great, and they can provide a lot of value. But I'll often encourage first time founders to try to find a capital mentor, to
Mhm.
try to find someone that built a business that's not super different than theirs, but maybe they operated within that business for like a longer period of time, and they just have some native awareness of the other kinds of capital that might come into play. And sooner rather than later, begin to familiarize yourself with those options, before you're kind of over a barrel, or evaluating funding things that you don't understand. Just making capital education and capital planning a more robust part of how you think about building your business, rather than just constantly thinking about how do you get the next equity investor to say yes to you.
Right. I just love that. And, I come from a little bit of an old school, like, you have to build the business, right? You have to build the business. It's not about getting money from somebody else to help you build the business. You have to first
Yeah,
figure,
build a business. Mm.
you got to build the business. And
Yeah.
the more traction you create, the more revenues you create, the more customers you find,
Optionality. Yeah,
right?
then you unlock optionality, right? And then then you can think about when to bring outside capital in, and think about how to do it. All capital has its costs, like figuring out how to have the right capital at the right time. And almost all of the companies I work with have, if they're doing it right, there's more than one kind of capital at play, right? There's equity, there's revenue, sometimes there's debt, like there's all kinds of stuff in the mix. And being able to navigate that as best you can is a very powerful skill that you can't, it's really hard to acquire that organically, and you don't get it at startup school. Like, startup school doesn't teach you about that stuff. So you've got to figure out how to get it yourself, either by bringing in advisors or people who can help you,
Yeah.
also, kind of coming up the curve, doing your research. But again, I really have a lot of empathy for first time founders, because if you've not built a business, worked in a business, you only know what you know. And so a lot of the work that I do, as a mentor and advisor, ends up skewing in that direction, because I typically will just have more knowledge about capital strategy than many of the founders that I meet, simply because I'm old now and I've been at it a long time and I've seen a lot of stuff. Like, it's not because I'm a genius. It's just I've been around the block enough times to be a little more facile with different types of capital than I was, when I started a company 30 years ago.
And I think there's so much to be said about just, especially as women, that we need to ask each other for help, ask other,
Absolutely.
we really do. Don't be afraid that it's, that we should know something we don't. This is my sixth company I'm founding now. And, I can tell you the first four were not that successful.
Yeah, 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 you only know what you know, right? Like,
Yeah,
it's really hard.
it's
Yeah,
really, really, really hard. And
yeah,
so,
I
and
agree.
and it's if you can go get a job that you like, you should. Right? Like, right.
I also
Be
also
be
agree,
a
like,
founder, be a founder if you can't help yourself, you can't do anything
yeah,
else. And and then it is a really wonderful ride. Albeit hard. Um,
yeah. Yeah.
So I know that you have a particular way once you have invested with a founder to help them. Can you talk about what your model is and how you help?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, I don't want to, it's not that special in the sense that, what we take we have a portfolio approach, right? Where when we are investing in a company, we see it as a long-term relationship, even if it's shorter than maybe the 8 or 9 years for an equity investment. I think 4 to 6 years is still a long time. So we start with the basics, making sure that either my partner or I, or one of us is really stitching into the company at the C-suite level and really helping them understand. We tend to focus a lot of our like high touch energy on the market facing side of companies. Having built now so many companies at this stage, try to bring that network of experience to bear, both through our alumni, through our other founders, bringing them together. We have some unique resources at play here where we have some employees in the fund that we use to amplify our company's market facing efforts. But it's really not much different than what any good fund does, which
Yeah.
is really learn to listen, figure out how you can help, and then come up with efficient ways to deliver that help that move beyond strategy and advisory really into either demonstration or execution. So I think you asked our founders what makes our contribution special is that we're not just meeting like once a month or twice a month to give you advice. We really focus on helping you turn ideas into action, either by showing you like demonstrable ways that you can do things, giving you actionable playbooks, modeling out things that we know are successful from past experiences in order to not just kind of tell you what to do, but to show you how to do it. And again, that's why we can only make so many investments a year. We're a high touch shop, and so on one hand, it limits the scale of how many companies we can invest into. And again, I want to just be transparent. Not all of that is altruistic. I mean, I do that to protect my investments, right? Like it's also a way for us to decrease downstream risk, right? I always feel a little bit like, cue national anthem. Like, well, yeah, I mean, sometimes I wish I didn't have to help so much, right? Because it would just be nice to take a vacation and see my family. But when you are a revenue investor, so when I was an equity investor, you're basically imagining a world where you make 100 investments, you're expecting 90 of them to die, and 10 of them you're trying to figure out which 3 are going to make the return for the whole fund. Our model is the absolute opposite of that. So
Right.
when we invest in 10 companies in a year, we're expecting, 9 of them to basically do what we think. And so you're really trying to uh, be as supportive as you can for all of them, in order to help them get up that growth curve. So it's definitely a different way of thinking about participation in a company. It's a little bit like it's a little more high touch, but as a consequence, it's lower volume.
Mhm. What I love about it is it brings you back to the point you made at the beginning is that your interests are so aligned with the founder, right? Every founder wants to,
Yeah, I like building companies. I want
right?
to make, and I want them to make more money, and I want them to have better unit economics, and I want them to be more profitable, and I want to help them get the capital that they need to continue to do that. And yeah, that's how I'm likely. I mean, I don't make money till way over there. So, like, my interests are kind of hinging on our ability collectively to be successful. I will say, again, when we're picking companies, I this is sort of the best of both worlds. You essentially want to invest in companies that are going to be successful with or without you, right? Like you really don't want to be the reason a company kind of lives or dies because we're just one group, right? In a pretty complicated world out there. But I think somewhere in between, they're going to be exactly who they are without you and fine without you. And, you're the make or break component, kind of somewhere in the middle is the right place to be where, they're probably going to be okay with or without you because the business is good and they're good. But that you're filling in blanks. A lot of times I think about it, it's not so much that I'm giving companies like these incredible mind blowing ideas. A lot of times what I'm doing is filling in potholes so they don't fall in them.
Yeah.
Like it's like not like a lot of times the nuts and bolts of my contribution to a company. Yes, occasionally we have really brilliant ideas that change the trajectory. But a lot of what helps companies at these stages is keeping them from falling into the hole that others have fallen into before
Right.
by either like illuminating the hole or putting something over it or helping them leap over it. And so it's not as sexy. I think sometimes people want like it to feel like investing is this really sexy sport where you're like changing the game every day. I'm like the bumpers on a bowling alley a lot of times. Like sometimes the greatest thing I do is I kept you out of the gutter
Yeah.
long enough for you to get yourself back on track, right? In order to hit the pin. I mean, I have to say that's like, I'm pretty good at that. That's what I'm good at, which is not as sexy as saying that, oh, I listened for a half hour and boy, I just had an idea that produced $80 million of revenue. Not so much. Yeah.
Right. But it's things like helping to see where in your metrics, focus on this,
Yes.
where you can improve here or there. What I love, you've got, 60 some investments you've made with this fund. And so that's up close and personal, seeing how these 60 companies
Yeah, yeah. You like,
are
yeah,
doing it.
yeah, good and bad, right? I mean,
Right.
you have to, remind yourself that things are different than they were 8 years ago or 10 years ago. But yeah, I mean, a,
Totally.
there is a lot of value in just being able to confidently show a founder these examples and say, look, like this is the problem you're trying to solve. Here's 3 different ways, 3 other people solved it and 3 different outcomes. Let's use that as a framework for how you want to like riff on that. And it makes a really big difference. I mean, longevity and experience is really helpful in investing. It can be a downfall sometimes where, if you wait too long to evolve and change your ideas, you can get stuck in modalities and things that maybe worked 10 years ago that don't work now. I think if you're constantly
Totally.
investing, you're sort of forced to stay more like contemporary. So I think like there are certainly pros and cons to longevity, but when it comes to, the work that I do, my experience is still, I think the value of my experience like still outweighs, any part of me that might be mired in the past.
Makes sense. Makes
Fingers
sense.
crossed.
Oh, I'm sure that's the case, Melissa, because you're right in
Trying.
all these companies. So what would you recommend to a founder who keeps pitching their business to this or that fund, but does not get funded?
Yeah. But I think when you think about why that might be, there's a couple ways to think about it. Like you have to ask yourself am I matching the right pattern, right? Funders have patterns and funders don't fund a one-off thing very often, right? So even individual investors, people don't often just do random stuff. If it seems like they're doing random stuff, it's probably because they're personality-driven investors and they're just really enthusiastic about the founder. But I think the first thing you have to do is ask yourself, honestly, do I match the pattern here? Like, like zoom out and look at what something that funder did fund. And do you truly look anything like it? And if you don't, then there's probably a problem with the pattern, right? You're in some ways you're barking up the wrong tree. I think there's also a question of timing. Did you approach a funder at the right time, like the right time for them, the right time for you? And then, certainly on the storytelling side,
Yeah.
having the right pitch, as much as it sucks, is very important. And people think about pitch, and I think in a too narrow way. Like pitch isn't like just your fundraising deck, right? It's actually kind of the whole narrative of your company. And when you are thinking about getting a capital partner excited about your business, I think there are 3 things a founder needs to think about in making that pitch. It's why now, why this, why you, right? I think first time founders don't realize that anybody that's been around longer than them knows how important timing is. So what is happening in the external world around you that makes this the right time for your company? It's actually been significant research done that timing can kills more companies than you could possibly imagine. Just too early, too late, right? So why is this the right moment? Like what's happening in the economy? What's happening in the consumer behavior world? What's happening that makes this the right time? So why now? Why this? Why is your product, your service, your intervention the right product, service, or tool to match the moment? And then why you? Why are you and your team the right team to bring this together in order to create that value that's going to attract the capital partner into your business? And I think if you are having trouble getting that story to resonate, it's because maybe you don't match the pattern. Or it could be that your story, that why now, why this, why you, really isn't hitting all the right notes.
Yeah.
And then I think the last part is just recognizing that capital is highly biased, highly informed by informal networks. And there's a tremendous amount of classism, racism, and sexism in capital. And so it could also be that the pattern that you're not matching is a pattern that reflects either race, gender, geography, like social credibility, networks. Like, I just don't want to leave that out because there are many very good businesses out there that are denied access to capital because of that. And not because their story wasn't good enough and not because they shouldn't have been funded. Right. So I think those are the three things that you have to look at. In my own experience, it's usually a combination of all of those three things. It's not usually just blatantly like you're a female founder, so we're not going to fund you.
Oh,
It's
right.
usually like the pattern matching isn't quite right, and that's just like you can't even overcome that. So my experience is that the inability to be successful as capital partners is some combination of those things.
That makes sense.
Can I say one last thing about that? I also think
Yeah.
there is a lot of really, really troubling, unfair rhetoric in the market that seems to give people hope that they will be funded and that even though most of us are not getting funded. So then it creates this I've failed, I've been rejected, right? That you just have to understand that most companies don't get outside capital for a long ass time. And they have to fund it through like really analog old school ways that can be highly problematic. So, personal wealth, the wealth of friends and families, highly leveraging your personal finances. So I think that's the other part is I think we've created this expectation that if you have a good company, you should get funded. But I think that unfortunately in North America, in the US market, we don't have that as much entrepreneurial funding as places like, the Canadian government does a really great job. Europe does a great job. But I think that there's also, so all of those things combined. And then there's just also the statistical reality that most people don't get funded for their business.
Yeah.
It may have nothing to do with you at all. Just the fact that wealth is controlled by a very small group of people in our country. Not that much of it trickles down to you. Macroeconomics, ladies and gentlemen.
Right.
And that is my TED Talk.
It's true. No, it's so true. And I think it does provide a little bit of a disservice because then you
feel like
think,
shit.
yeah, but really, it's a very small percentage, under 5%.
It is. It really is.
4%.
Yeah.
And so like, if you want to build a company, go build it. And you may, look at what you have in terms of your resources and your network that you have and find.
Yeah. You just have to be really brutally honest with yourself about how little money you're likely to get. And if you can't make the plan work, don't chill yourself on that hill waiting for go get a job and save some money and try again next year. It's very demoralizing and not like, this is not my most inspirational moment, but I think don't ruin your life and let your life pass you by because you couldn't get your first or second idea funded. Just like you only you got to take care of yourself. You need to feed yourself. You need to secure yourself. And entrepreneurship, as powerful as it is, does not always present that opportunity to everyone equally. So I think we live in a totally capitalist system where, it's not a meritocracy either, right? Which is sort of orthogonal to the idea. It's like we live in a capitalist system that's also not a meritocracy. Right. It's like the worst of both worlds, right? It's a capitalist society that requires you to meet all these metrics. But even if you meet all those metrics, it still might not fund you. Yay. But, right. Okay. But it's just true. It's just true. And, just don't give up. Find ways, find people, find believers, be scrappy, look at all the different options. Stitch it together. Where there's a will, there's a way. I love all that stuff. But at the end of the day, also take care of yourself.
Take care of yourself. Right.
Yeah.
It's true.
And don't poverty is not, the poorer you get, the less likely you are. I know there's crazy stories about people living in their car and then finding success. And again, I don't want to be dismissive of that. And there are some amazing people out there that have told some incredible stories about being, literally living out of their car and then having entrepreneurship transform them from that. I just think there's also another side of that story where the transformation does not happen. And sometimes your best bet to allow yourself to have opportunity downstream is to, take a different approach today to make sure that you leave open the possibility tomorrow that you can pursue your entrepreneurial dreams, even if you can't pursue it today. So it's just putting those things in balance, like without being negative. I guess I'm kind of pragmatic in that way.
I think it's really
Mom has got bills to
valuable.
pay. So I think
Mama's got bills to
mom has
pay.
got bills to pay. Yeah. So I just still think a lot about making money. And you got to be really careful if you're going to not make money to chase your dreams. Just, it's amazing and feel good about it, but also know that there's no failure in changing your mind at some point and deciding that the
Not
right
at
thing to
all.
do for you is to put some money in the bank by getting a JOB.
Yeah. And that can also spur your feelings of security and sanity. And it's gonna
Yes, which might actually make you a better entrepreneur when the moment comes, right? I would
exactly.
be a terrible entrepreneur if I hadn't had so much experience working for someone else. Like,
Well, that's
like,
right. Right.
like I, like I,
Infrastructure, the accountability, right? All those,
totally. Yeah,
right?
I'm only actually became a okay entrepreneur because I work so much for other people and learn. So, I mean, some founders you just come right out of the gates and that's great. I was not like naturally the leader. I needed to grow into my leadership. I needed to grow into my knowledge, grow into my confidence, grow into being
Yeah.
able to take financial risk myself. Right. And
Yeah.
none of that could have happened. None of
Yes.
that was possible for me when I was in college. Right. Like I really didn't come into that until I was, in my 40s. Like it took time.
It takes some time and,
Thanks.
like, let it be a journey. It is, if you are really truly loving being a founder and you are a founder at heart, it just allow the journey to unfold. You're going to
Yeah.
learn a
Give
lot
yourself
along
some
the way.
grace. Yeah. Give
Yeah.
yourself some grace that like dipping in and out is like super normal and it's not failure.
Super normal.
Yeah.
So, how can founders pitch your fund?
Well, the best thing to do is to go to our website and read our selection criteria, as we just
Yes.
talked about, because if you don't match the pattern a little bit, then I probably can't help you. So don't waste your time with me. Waste your time with somebody else that looks more like you, who funds like you.
Yeah.
You can submit a pre-screening form on our website where you can share a little bit about your business. You can upload your deck. We have open office hours all the time. You'll find us at lots of startup events. You can request a pre-screening meeting. Pretty much, if you've got something that you want to share, you can do it through our website. Although I will tell you, everyone, the best way to get to an investor is through a warm intro. So now that I've told you the official way to get to me, the way that you get to me is the same way you get to any investor. You go to my LinkedIn page and you see who we have in common and you see which of those fools would be willing to carry your water for you and send me a delightful personal email with your deck attached saying, I would really appreciate it if you would take time to talk to this founder. That is actually for better or worse, because again, it's not a meritocracy, right? That can be really unfair for people if you're not networked into that. But the way to get any investor to notice you is to get a warm introduction from a person that investor trusts and knows. Hard facts.
Brilliant, brilliant and honest, real true advice.
Yep.
Thank you so much,
My
Melissa.
pleasure. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
I love chatting with you. And,
This is great.
I think way you're doing things and what you're doing is just extraordinary. And I love that there's alternatives to
Me too.
straight up equity. And I'm excited. I want to know about how, I'm sure our listeners all want to know how you continue to make more options available.
More options. Yes. More innovation,
options.
more
Yeah.
options. I'm down. I'm down for it. Yeah. Thanks. I really enjoyed it. I could talk about this all day. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. So thank you everybody for joining us today on Women Get Funded. Thank you for illuminating the path, Melissa, to unlocking opportunities for growth and prosperity for women-led enterprises. The world is made better by women-led business. And so let's all go make the world a better place.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are you ready to take the next big step in planning, propelling, and funding the exponential growth in your high impact business? Welcome to the Force for Good Business Accelerator. The next step is the Force for Good Business Accelerator. At A Force for Good, we know that growth is a puzzle you can solve. You too can cross the chasm of scaling and funding at www.aforceforgood.biz/accelerator. Designed for women founders and their teams, this virtual experience is your opportunity to immerse yourself in a transformative process that will create a flywheel effect for your entire company. First, you'll build and implement a growth plan. This plan will be designed to help you accelerate product market fit and fine-tune a go-to-market strategy that produces more prospects, more customers, more traction, more growth. Next, you will explore all the many options for funding your business, from angel investors to venture, crowdfunding, grants to loans. We will help you explore every option available to ensure you always have the fuel to keep growing. Along the way, you will elevate as a transformative leader, discovering clarity, confidence, and wisdom with each step along the journey. We will guide you every step of the way, and with options for additional support available to help you grow more quickly, we help you believe in our mantra that growth is a puzzle you can solve. Learn more about the Force for Good Virtual Business Accelerator today at www.aforceforgood.biz/accelerator. That's right, www.aforceforgood.biz/accelerator.